Hi everyone, welcome to the 000, the War Inside and Out podcast. This is where police, fireys, ambulance officers, doctors and nurses have the opportunity to share their experiences of what it's like on the front line. If you are battling post-traumatic stress disorder, please watch or listen to this on Spotify and YouTube with a support person. If you are in immediate danger, please contact Lifeline 13 11 14. I hope you get some value and some educational strategies on how to deal with PTSD, and I hope you get a greater understanding of what emergency services go through on a day-to-day basis. If you'd like to reach out to me to share your experience, my email is craiggibson75@outlook.com and my Instagram handle is craig_gibson75. Thanks very much for listening and watching. As I said, it's available on YouTube and Spotify, and please reach out to us if you need any help whatsoever. Thanks very much, guys. Alright, g'day everyone. Welcome to 000, the War Inside and Out. This is part 2 of our chat with Matt Hamilton. The first episode, I really encourage everyone to have a listen to that in relation to Matt's experience as a New South Wales police officer, some of the jobs that he endured through that, some of the stations and units that Matt worked in, and it was a really great insight into what a New South Wales police officer, how a career unfolds and certain jobs that you go to. So this is part 2, and Matt, how you going?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, thanks, Gibbo. It's been an interesting couple of weeks since we released the last one, and I've had the opportunity to chat to few people that listened to it, and it was an interesting experience actually, because despite knowing some of the people very well, there was a lot of things that I guess I'd never really discussed with them before, so it was interesting to hear their perspective on it.
Can you give any feedback on that, or how has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been good actually in some respects. There was a few people, particularly an old colleague of mine from where I used to work, and in the tactical operations unit, and I sent him sort of the original cut before it was released and asked for his opinion on it, because it was important to me that I didn't portray anything that they thought was inappropriate, as in, I don't mean the organisation, I mean as friends, as people that knew me.
Yeah.
And just was, hoping to get a bit of support from him, and certainly did. It was refreshing to hear that. He was very supportive of it, and thought that it was pretty authentic and from the heart, which is what I intended it to be from the outset. But one of the interesting things, which we might touch on a little later, was how things have changed down there, not only from a cultural perspective, but a little bit of the way in which they deal with things now compared to when I exited. So that might be something we touch on a little later.
Would love to get an insight into that. I think being where we have been, and then talking to people that are currently still in those units and in those stations, hearing those experiences now and how things have changed or haven't changed, I think gives us a really good insight into where the organisation's going as a whole.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that maybe have changed might be reflective more on the impact in the particular units or sections that have been affected. So those that have been affected more so than others might have taken the ball up and put in some better strategies for managing these things, and those that maybe didn't suffer as much of a loss might not really have felt the effects of it, and hence maybe not taken the necessary steps to improve it. So, but yeah, I can only comment on sort of the areas of people that I know that are still working in those particular areas. So
yeah, I've had a lot of really positive feedback in from your story so far, and people reaching out and saying they loved your honesty and loved how you articulated certain situations. So thanks so much for sharing that. We're probably going to get into an area now that that is uncomfortable, and again, thanks for sharing this and being open and vulnerable.
No, that's fine. Look, I'm at the point now where, to be quite honest, if I wasn't being open about it and wasn't being straight to the point, I think that I'd be doing everyone who was listening a bit of a disservice. I'm not here to paint anything in a particular light, and I'm certainly not trying to give a biased view of the way things unfold. I'm just trying to tell the story the way that it affected me directly.
Your experience.
My experience, not, there's, and I've heard very different experiences from lots of people, which I'm sure you have as well. Some people have some terrible experiences with either the organisation or colleagues or insurance or things of that nature, and some people have quite good experiences given the circumstances.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to be pretty authentic about what happened to me and how it affected me directly.
Perfect. So we got up to a point in part one where we discussed your career, up to a point where you woke up one day and you had this overwhelming feeling of I couldn't go to work. You were quite emotional about that. You sought some help initially, which came back as a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, so that was 2010, and I'd come to the point there where initially I'd been to my GP. I think I spoke about that, and ended up being referred to a psychiatrist, and was medicated at that time, diagnosed with, it was like a dual diagnosis. It was chronic depression and PTSD. So I think I went through an independent assessment from the insurer fairly early in the piece. It's like a liability assessment or something, I think they call it, to determine whether they're going to accept liability for the claim. They obviously did that. They came back with a slightly different diagnosis from memory. I don't remember the details, but it was chronic depression, but there was something other than PTSD. It was like, let me think of it. I don't know the technical name for it, but it was like some sort of realisation of your current position. And I don't remember the terminology for it, but they didn't categorise it as PTSD. And when my psychiatrist looked at it, he said, no, look, that's just it's kind of a lower diagnosis, if you like. I don't know what any of that means. Irrespective, it ended up coming back as PTSD by everybody involved after reviewing it and going through that process.
Yeah.
As I sort of explained before, I during the course of my service, I didn't really get a huge amount of ongoing nightmares and ongoing pervasive thoughts. Not that would trigger me to think I have this problem.
And I want to leave the job because of it, or
Yeah.
I need to leave the job.
No,
Yeah.
it didn't occur for me that way. What happened was I explained to you that one morning I essentially woke up and was in tears for no obvious reason, and having some real difficulty in just stringing a sentence together without crying and not understanding completely why. That went on for some time, where I was just it was almost reacting rather than making conscious decisions about things. It was just a reaction to the way I was feeling.
Yeah.
So that kind of got amplified to some extent when I was medicated. So I ended up going on some antidepressants for a period of time, and I don't remember what they were, but I remember being on them somewhere in the vicinity of 3 months, thereabouts.
Did you find they helped?
So yes and no. So I went from being very emotionally volatile, if you like that, crying, angry, ashamed, crying, angry, ashamed, thinking about work more so than I was when I was in the job, in respect that I was thinking about the things that I thought might have been contributing to the way I was feeling. And I don't know that I'd ever actually allowed myself to do that. And I don't know whether that makes any sense or not, but for me, it was like the emotional floodgates had opened. I had no way of stopping that. And I would have, jobs similar to ones that I'd mentioned that would revisit me, fairly frequently over the course of a year while I was in the job, but not so much as to affect what I was doing day to day. So I would just stop thinking about that shit, just, get on with it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until that emotional breakdown that kind of impacted, much more heavily than what it had before. When I was medicated and given the antidepressants, the thoughts were still there, but the reaction to the thoughts was minimised. The downside to it was that everything was minimised. So if you can imagine that I wasn't in as deep, dark a place, like I felt like I could get out of bed, but that was all.
Yeah.
So it was allowing me to get up. It was allowing me to mope around the house. It was allowing me to do those types of things initially, and nothing else. I still didn't have a drive to train or to do anything that was taxing or do anything that was, requiring any degree of effort. I didn't really have any levity, so there was no, you're like an empty shell is the way I would describe it.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's been on those things will kind of understand what I'm talking about. You are flat. You're not up, you're not down. So after we went through a process where I would visit the psychiatrist, I think it was once a week at that point, and we would talk about how I was feeling and what was going on, and what I was thinking about and things like that. And I was trying to be a little bit productive at home at the time, but really couldn't strike a blow. I had some things that I was trying to be interested in. I was doing a little bit of woodwork at the time and a little bit of playing around at home with that sort of thing, and I just really couldn't get it going,
Yeah.
And so day to day was just this bit of a mope around. You go to the shops, you do what you need to do as far as we had young kids, doing the bare minimum there, but you're not really interacting with anybody. You become an empty shell and very withdrawn. Just not, I wasn't comfortable in sort of social settings at that point. Family gatherings and things, I would just find a corner and kind of withdraw.
Yeah.
I wasn't as emotionally fragile in respect that I wasn't crying constantly, and I wasn't getting, perhaps as angry as I had done previously. Kind of skimmed over that. I didn't even really get into that last time, but there was instances before when our kids were young, and I'm probably a little bit ashamed to talk about that side of things, but there'd be, that frustration you get when your kid just won't stop crying, and you grab the kid and you're like, just fucking stop crying, So that sensation where you're squeezing as tight as you can, but you've got enough conscience of mind to not impart that pressure through your hands, but it's that, you know, that split where you think, I could just throw this child across the room, or I could just crush this child, you know. And thankfully I was in a position where, how or why I don't know, but I was able to, you know, control that side of things to the point where I would just put them down and go, you know, just walk, go. And then generally find something outside that I could bash into 1,000 pieces.
Yeah.
The poor dog a few times copped the back end of it, you know. I remember one time I was trying to do something outside with a hammer, and I'd had a bit of a dream about earlier on, like a daydream, I guess, if you want to call it that. I was hammering something, and I had a dream about somebody who had their head essentially caved in with a hammer. And I haven't been to a job where a guy got his head caved in or a girl got his head caved in with a hammer. I mean, I've been to jobs that are similar, I suppose, but not that specific jobs. It wasn't like I was remembering a job. It was just a vision that I had. And the dog got in the way of the work that I was doing, and I grabbed the thing by the collar, and I had this hammer in my hand, and I was like that close to just driving it through the top of its head. And I give it a throw and I give it a kick and just get out of there. And I remember then just smashing this bit of wood that I had with this hammer until it was splintering to pieces, and just broke down and started crying over it for no logical reason that would come to mind. It was just like a pent-up angst that you just couldn't get out. And then as soon as you did it, it was like instant shame, instant, what the fuck are you doing?
Was part of the frustration and the anger coming from you trying to understand how you were now feeling?
I don't know whether it's that or the lack of self-control, the frustration of not being able to control it, you know, not being able to
because you've just spent 16 years in the police, in full control.
Yeah, maybe.
And controlling every part of your working life, and everything was planned, and everything, all the assessments were done right. You were executing according to the plan, and it was all in control. It was all professional.
Yeah.
And now you're trying to deal with this new situation where you inside, your emotions are not in your control, and that's causing the anger.
Yeah, I mean, quite. It could be. It really could be. I mean, I guess there's probably, thinking about it logically now, there was probably a lot of elements that I had lost control over. I'd lost control over the job I was doing. Lost control over my ability to interact normally with my family. Lost control of my ability to control my emotions. You know, I was medicated to the point that it was interfering with my normal, what I thought would be my normal behaviour.
Yeah.
You know? And so this type of, you know, anger was kind of brewing, I guess, under the surface for the most part. And I'm normally a pretty relaxed kind of guy as far as I'm concerned. Like, I think I am. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm a lunatic. But I think I'm normally quite relaxed and pretty calculated with being calm and not overreacting to things. I'm not the type of person that will yell and fly off the handle easily. And that was certainly, you know, coming more to the surface. It's funny because it wouldn't happen at work. Wouldn't do it at work. Work was in control. When I was at work, I felt in control. I didn't feel out of control. I felt probably that at that point, despite, you know, having beautiful kids and having a wife that loved me and all the rest of it, that work sort of occupied my entire thoughts. And that was the one thing. And I guess heavily identified as being a police officer. It's been part of my life for a long time, and I'm going to kind of use this analogy that coppers who are still in the job will understand this. So when you go to any police station or area commander or office or unit, you get, it's hard to put a figure on, but you get a percentage of the people that work there who are just going through the motions. You know, they're there, they're doing their job, but that's all they're doing. They leave the place and they can disassociate with it. They can lead a relatively normal life outside, as far as I'm aware, and they're not heavily invested. They don't do more than they need to. They do, we want to call it the bare minimum.
Yep.
That's what they do. Then you're going to get people that are kind of in the middle, that do a bit more when they're keen, and then otherwise not so much. And then you're going to get the go-getters. And the people that are, you know, heavily identify themselves as police, that is they are police. You know, they don't separate the job from their life.
Yes.
And those people, you know, I stick my hand up as being one of those people, and most of my friends are those people. Now, the good part about that is that you are, you know, the bosses like you. You're active, you're busy, you're always on the hunt, you're always doing the work, you're always staying back later or getting in earlier or doing more than you need to, more than your fair share. Now, I guess the downside to that is that it consumes everything. If you take that away, then you take away all that. And a lot of the people that I know that have left in similar circumstances have lost all that, and it's more than a job. And I know the insurers look at it, because I guess they can't quantify it in any other way, that it's a dollar and cents arrangement. So there's the job, there's, you know, you're getting paid a wage for that job, but the way that the people who are invested in that, the way that they feel is that it's more than that. It's their identity. It's why they get up in the morning, and doing the work is part of who they are. It's not what they do. You know, and I think those people, most of which are very good friends of mine, the same type of people, I suppose. Sort of, I guess you orientate yourself with like-minded people in that environment. And most of those people, I think, are more, I guess it makes sense that they are more vulnerable in respect to the amount of exposure that they get, the amount of stress that they would carry, even though it's voluntary. And even though, probably like me, in most cases, it's not recognised until it breaks.
Yes.
You know, we can talk about strategies that different organisations or different individuals might put in place to try and identify, you know, problems with PTSD and things of that nature early in the piece. But the issue is that if the individual doesn't recognise it, then none of it's of any use. And I think that's probably the biggest battle. And this is something that might sound very counterintuitive, and I don't have a good answer, but I would act very cautiously before I invited my colleagues who are still in to openly think about some of these things. You put on that suit of armour, if you want to call it the blue armour, whatever, and you do the job. If you decide then that you want to, you know, look into some of the demons that lurk in your mind, you best be careful that you can still close the lid on it. Because once you open the lid, if you're like me and like a lot of others, when you open the lid, you can't put it back again. You can't shut it down. And once you do that, it makes it very difficult to go and do your job. And so I know it's probably not healthy. I know it's not ideal from a mental health perspective, but it is something that I don't know whether... The bottom line is the job by its nature is destructive for your mental health.
Yes.
That you speak to anybody in that line, and that's the answer. Seeing those things, doing those things is destructive for your mental health for a long period of time, particularly. Albeit, again, I've got some thoughts on that. I think most of the damage is actually done earlier rather than later. But it's not recognised until a lot later. So I think it's a dangerous proposition to go thinking about those things if you're still planning on being an operational policeman in that area. It's cautiously done.
One thing I found too, if you are a go-getter and you're on the hunt all the time and you are that cop, which pretty much we were, you're putting yourself into a lot more riskier situations. You then surround yourself with like-minded people that are also go-getters, also on the hunt, also risk-takers. So then your social situations become even heightened by war stories and talking about being on the hunt and being, I did this and I went through this and how about this. And so there's no escape from that heightened level of alertness and just the activity, that the constant exposure that cops, being a cop, brings. It's happening at work, but then if you start surrounding yourself with only police and like-minded police, your social situations can be, or even if you're married to another police officer, your social situations and your family situations are all heightened.
Oh, 100%. It's perpetuated by it. Because if you remember back, it's when you would go to a social function like a party or something with other police, which most, probably 90% of my social functions were with other police at that point.
Yeah.
Outside of family. And the talk is shop talk. It's talking about work. It's stories about work. It's backslapping and encouragement was the sign of, respect from the people that you were working with, and the bigger the job, the more adventurous it was, the more exciting it was, the more dangerous it was, the bigger the backslaps and the accolades.
You wanted the Players Player Award, recognition from your peers.
100%, and it was from your peers. You didn't really care what the organisation thought. It was that. So if you consider that, and you consider that it is encouraged by your friends and colleagues, then equally discouraged would be the signs of shame, like the signs of weakness, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
And I think that in some ways, when I left, I was one of there was a raft of guys left from the unit that I was in a fairly short space of time, I suppose. And when I left, I don't know whether it was a catalyst for other people to leave or whether it was, if he can leave, shit, anybody can leave. If he can go, then anybody can go.
Yep.
It may not be right. That was my perception of it, that if I could go, anybody could go. And I think at this point I'm going to touch on something that is probably going to ruffle some feathers within the police as far as motives for people leaving and things of that nature. So for those that don't know, who are listening, who don't know anything about how this process works, well, when I left in 2010, the situation was, if you were medically discharged at that point, that was quite a lengthy process, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But the process was long. It's like 12 months or 9 months or something. It was a pretty long process. Getting out, you would basically, depending on how old you were, depending on when you joined, and depending on how long you had served, there was a calculation made for a sum of money that you would get in order to compensate you for basically, you're starting at the bottom of the food chain when it comes to future employment. And they would determine those claims in two categories. One was what they call partial and permanent disability, and the other one was total and permanent disability. And the difference between the two was pretty much partial and permanent meant that you were permanently disabled by way of a mental illness in these situations, but you were partially disabled or partially incapacitated. So you could perform jobs other than things like emergency services jobs and things of that nature. Anything that wouldn't aggravate your mental health situation.
Yes. Yep.
Now, on the other side of the coin, the total and permanent was essentially that you couldn't perform any work. There were a few differentials in that depending on what scheme you were in, there were some people who could get diagnosed total and permanent, but through a different definition of it. So there was a period of time where the definition was, depending on when you entered the job, I think they had a definition that was something along the lines of any occupation for which you were reasonably trained or qualified. So basically it was like, if you couldn't be a policeman, then you would be eligible to total and permanent disablement. But it varied depending on where you were, how old you were and all that sort of stuff when you joined. So to give an understanding of the sums of money that were given out, it was for people in my situation, which is the only one I can kind of comment on. I don't know the calculations for some of the others. We weren't entitled to get our superannuation out. We had to leave that. And we were given a sum of money that was somewhere in the vicinity, I think, of maybe 6 times your annual salary, something like that. And I think there was a tax component in that, but I don't know exactly. It's going back a while now.
Yeah.
So you would get some people that would get, somewhere in the vicinity of a couple of $100,000, and then some people who were getting, up in the ballpark of, maybe 8 or 900,000 or something. Those who could maybe take their super with them, as well.
Yeah.
So, of course, as soon as you introduce money into a situation, the automatic thought from those looking in is that everybody just goes off to get the money. They go, there's this lump sum of money. I'm not really having fun at work anymore. How about I'll put on this ruse and take the money. And look, I have no doubt that there was people that did that. No doubt that people had talked to other people within the organisation who had been through the process and answered questions a particular way in order to get a particular result and behaved in a certain way, etc.
Yes.
There's a few elements to that, though, that I think you need to look at a little deeper, and there's a couple of things with it. So it was clearly understood in our office that there was money to be had, albeit that I don't think anyone had actually got it when most people had gone off.
Yeah.
So there was this, this was an understanding that there was money there, but I don't know at the point. Certainly when I got out, there was nobody that, had it. It was just this, proposed, this is how it works and this is what happens.
Yeah, okay.
But after that, I understand later down the track, there was other people that would have known, this person has definitely got this and so on and so forth. And it was actually, I think, quite, widely known through the police at the time that I was there that this was what was, available to people if they exited.
Yeah, right.
And so that would have no doubt influenced some people.
Yeah.
The other part of it, though, is that I think people maybe don't consider is that in my situation, I'll talk about me first. So for me, there was definitely discussions in and amongst the group. We had one guy, in and amongst the group, that there was, it was well known that one of the guys had gone off recently, sort of not that far in the future, or not that far in the past, I should say. And the automatic belief was that, okay, he's going because he's had enough, and he's got to, he's just going to sort of play the insurance and get the money and do what he has to do to jump through the hoops and be diagnosed. Now, bearing in mind that probably anyone who's actually been in the police has got PTSD, so it's not realistically, even if you just went in and answered most of the questions properly, just gave them the exact answers that they asked for, you would be diagnosed with it anyway.
Yes.
So it's not, in most cases, it wasn't, there was no requirement to fabricate any answers. I certainly didn't lie about anything that I said. I didn't need to, make up answers to questions. If they asked me something, I would answer it exactly, and I was just saying how I was feeling.
Yes.
And it was that straightforward. We'll go on to a bit more of my process later, but based on what we hear, one of the guys that went out of the unit who subsequently took his own life, so you know who I'm talking about. Some of the people within the organisation were, very dubious about whether his claim was genuine. They were very dubious about, at the time, whether it was a money grab. And then a few years down the track, we see the results of what true mental health problems presents pays the ultimate price. And that rubs you the wrong way when you hear that, because what people maybe don't consider is that if you're in a unit such as the one that we're in, when you can't hack it anymore, it's not very manly to go, I can't hack it anymore. What's more manly is to go, I'm just playing this insurance game kind of thing. I'll get the cash and go. Much more, okay, it's just going,
Yeah.
That flies. I know it sounds crazy, but that there is like, okay. People will accept that. Some people are, horrified by the idea that someone would do that. But I honestly think that in some people's eyes, that's like the cool thing to do, or that's acceptable because, he's doing that for these reasons. He's not a sook, So that's one aspect of it.
I love that you bring that up, because I would have said or done anything so my peers wouldn't think I was a weak man.
So this is it. So you'd rather be thought of as, manipulative, playing the system, getting what's yours kind of guy than weak.
Exactly.
Right? That, because weak isn't cool.
No.
Weak is weak. Manipulative, getting some cash, doing whatever, that's cool. But weak isn't cool.
Yeah.
And
which then brings up guilt and shame and opens up a whole nother...
It's a whole different...
ball game.
Right. So, look, there's that element of it. Are people going off for those reasons? Well, now I understand that the financial situation is somewhat different, and it's certainly not as lucrative for those who exit now. Secondly, the money for some people is quite simply, and when they see other people go off, is quite simply the equivalent of a conversation that allows that vulnerability to open. It's that safety net. It's that... It's that... I'm trying to think of the appropriate way of phrasing it, but it is, you're in a safe place. You can let it go now. It's that ability to stop and think about 10, 20 years worth of stress, trauma, shit that you can just let go. and talk about if you want to. It's that potentially that safety net to just go blah.
I've had people reach out to me through these podcasts and saying this, that I'm struggling to deal with what I'm dealing with whilst worrying about the family and paying the mortgage and the credit card or the car loan, or I'm so stressed because of the financial situation, I can't even deal with the emotional side or what I'm dealing with my PTSD. So is that what you mean in terms of, okay, if the money's there, that's a safety net?
What I actually mean is that if people, I think, particularly in my situation, that I wasn't motivated to get out for a financial reward. I wasn't motivated to go, I'm going to act this way so that I can collect this sum of money and no longer be a policeman.
Yeah.
Didn't enter my mind in that regard.
Yeah.
What happened to me was I emotionally fell over. I think subconsciously that knowing that I could actually stop and think about these things or stop and process these things might have been something that, through other conversations within the office with people that, and the fellow I was talking about had gone off prior to that, I think the conversations like that actually awoke something inside me to go, maybe you should stop and think about this shit.
Yes.
But I'd never had conversations like that before. Nobody else had. Why? Because nobody ever entertained the idea of doing it. And so once the door was open to think that, hey, maybe we can stop and think about this, then you get into this slope that just goes like that. And you open the can. And whether you deliberately do it or whether it becomes a reaction to complete overwhelming emotion, then you end up in this situation where you've opened the can, can't put the lid back on it. You don't know how to react to it because you've never felt it before. You've got people advising you and telling you that this is what it's likely to be from. This is likely cause. You tell them what you think and feel, and they reinforce what you're, why you're feeling that way. And you end up in a situation where soon enough you're like, from a fairly long career, it seems, and it seemed like a really long time when I was going through it, as far as that, 9 or 12 months turnaround from when you go off to when you actually get out. But looking back at it now, it seemed like a whirlwind.
Yeah.
So it was just like this emotional cascade that happened really quickly. When you end up on that slope, you don't know. The mind's a funny thing. If you had, say, I had a busted leg, and I go to put my foot on the ground, and I'm aware that I've got a broken leg, and your body recoils from you putting the foot on the ground. You would have had this with plenty of injuries. Everyone's done it. Or you get a sprained ankle, and you go to put it down, and then you've got it, say, you've iced it, you've recovered it, but you're on crutches, and the first time you take a crutch out and go to put weight on it, you pull away from it. Your body has a pretty good mechanism for recognising what has hurt you previously and guiding you away from it.
Yes.
And a lot of the time that can be by way of an overreaction. That can be, something that's not consciously controllable for a period of time. You might be able to get over it in the long term, but in the short term, it's like it's a response. It's like this, I know this is going to hurt me, so I'm going to pull away from it, even though it hasn't hurt me yet.
Yes.
Yeah. I think mentally your body perhaps does the same thing.
100%.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
So you've been, incapacitated emotionally, which has led you to being almost incapacitated physically for a period of time. You are then in a position where you start second guessing, is this in my head? Like, am I construing this the wrong way? And you start trying to rationalise it, but you're not thinking rationally at the time. You're medicated. You're thinking about, you know, did I cause this myself? Is this, you know, should I be doing this? Shouldn't I just man up, get back to work, just stop being a sook, you know? And so this cycle goes round your head, along with all the other thoughts that are already there from the PTSD related stuff. You've got these other cascade of emotions that is going on simultaneously. You know, the stress of feeling like you're being judged, the stress of losing your job, the stress of throwing away, you know, what you recognise yourself to be, and have done so for so many years. And that has a long-term effect. And I think the long-term effect for me, more so than anything else, is I have to be very careful with what I do now. So my way of coping with PTSD was to immerse myself in busyness. It still is. So if you were to say, have I dealt with my PTSD? Don't think I ever will. I like to think of myself as a little bit stoic in nature, you know, get the job done, move on. But I'm kidding myself, because I've already proven that, you know, I've fallen over into a big heap previously. And what I'm terrified of is that happening again.
Take your time, mate.
See? Stoic. So for me,
busyness,
being super busy,
do you accept help?
Sometimes. Not very often. Sorry, compose myself.
Don't be sorry at all, mate, please.
For me, being... it's a counselling session. Good. For me, being super busy is the coping mechanism. For me, not slowing down to stop, it's a blessing, but it's a curse. So you take on things that are probably well beyond your capacity and make it happen anyway. Just work at it until it's done.
Yeah.
You know? And I think one of the things with that, though, is that as soon as things don't go to schedule or plan, or you no longer feel yourself moving forward, you stumble.
Yeah.
And you associate that stumbling with that slippery slope that you were on before. So what ends up happening is any type of backward loss of momentum, you end up in this position where you can get like this. And you stop and go, shit, I don't want to be back down there again. You know, I don't want to be back to the point where I'm living life completely alone. You're not alone. There's people there. There's people there that care about you. But for all intents and purposes, you're alone in your own mind.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people that have maybe been through it can relate to that. So...
Do you want to have a break, mate?
No, I'm good. So what my way of dealing with it, and as I said, I probably never will actually deal with it.
Yeah.
My way of moving forward with it and keeping positive and actually getting something productive done, because the one thing that I find that helps is achievement. Mental focus, achievement gets me by, you know. So being able to do, things that other people can't do through a lot of tenacity and hard work and good work ethic and all that sort of gear, is really important for me. That's what drags me out from feeling, hopeless, really.
Yeah.
So I did things like I took on, some timber work, I suppose, initially. And it was initially planned just to be a shed at the property we were living in at the time. And I just started looking at some timber framing magazines that I'd seen around and, did all sorts of research on timber framing. And it's funny because subconsciously I was doing all this before I'd even left the TOU. I had an interest in it. And I think I told you that when I first was off, I tried to apply myself to it. And it just wasn't happening. I couldn't do it. And so after a few months of going off the medication, probably 3 months, I took up the ball, and then all I did was basically isolate myself with my woodwork. And I think you've been to my place and seen what we're talking about. And
so I'm going to put up some pictures and some video of the timber work and the work that you did during that time, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it had to be that elaborate to occupy my motivation and thoughts and stop me from falling apart, basically.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I just immersed myself in it completely, bit off well more than I can chew. My wife was incredibly patient with the whole process because it was a couple of years of cutting wood. It sounds ridiculous, but I would isolate myself and go there in the morning, start my wood cutting, maybe pop up for a bite to eat at lunch, and then go back there and not come in till dinner. And that was it.
Yeah.
And that was sort of my life for a good couple of years. That's all I did. And it needed to be significant enough to keep me motivated to do that. So, it was a big job and it needed to soak up every minute.
Yeah.
And it did that. Unfortunately, the repercussions of such big efforts and such big sort of dreams is that you isolate yourself from your family. And I went from that to opening a gym, which required as much effort, still takes up as much of my time, and probably one of the things that I regret the most is that I don't spend enough quality time with my family. So I spend time with my family, and I'm trying very much so to be better at being present.
Yep.
So I'm there and I do the right things. I'm not a lazy husband that doesn't contribute, or I don't go and not see my kids do things. It's not that. I just have a lot of difficulty separating myself from my busy mind.
Yes.
I can't be still. I can't lay on the beach and look at the sun, or have a sleep. I can't do that. Now, whether that's got anything to do with PTSD or not, I have no clue. But I'm just saying that if I feel like I slow down, that's when I feel like I'm slipping, and that's when I feel the same association with the feelings that I felt before, which results in me crying like this. But that...
It's great that you show this emotion.
Yeah, believe me, I'm not trying to.
Yeah.
It's...
because this is an insight into you saying PTSD never leaves you. It's how you manage it and the effects that it has for so long after you even leave.
Yeah, it's... And how silly is it? We're having this adult conversation about this, but I still feel completely ashamed by how I feel now. It's crazy. Adult male should know better, but obviously not.
I respect your vulnerability and openness far deeper.
Yeah, I get it.
Talking to you like this.
I get it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's probably a very good thing. You know, my eyes have been dry for a long time, so it's probably a very good thing. But it is, it's difficult for, you know, my mental picture of myself is different to this. And I shouldn't see it as a weakness. I should see it as a normal reaction to human behaviour. But, you know, it's not easy to accept that.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question about
that?
Yeah,
go for it.
We place our identity and act accordingly to being a man.
Yeah.
You are in the police and you take on the identity of being a man or someone who is stoic and brave to be a police officer. So your identity as a man or your identity as a police officer, people struggle once they leave the police with letting go of that identity or having to deal with, I'm not a police officer anymore.
Yeah.
Did you have that? And how, like, because people have reached out and are really struggling with what's life like after the police, and I identify as a police officer and I can't let that go. You know, I identify as a man. I need to act a certain way.
100%, mate. I struggle with not so much being a police officer, like not anymore anyway. Potentially at one point I did. I think I struggle more with the reputation that I perceived that I left behind. You know, I went from a job where I felt like I, you know, had achieved some good things, was well respected by the people that knew me.
Yeah.
To feeling like that now that I'm no longer there, you start over in trying to, you know, that respect process starts from zero. It doesn't really, because there's people, you know, your family love you and they respect you and all these other things, and your friends outside of the job, you know, probably see it completely differently. But in your own mind, you know, that was such a big part of your life that when you step away from that, you go back from being somebody to being nobody in your own mind.
In your mind.
What have you achieved? Well, you know, when you go out with people after that, you know, people talk about their work and what they're doing and how well they're doing, and you go, well, you know, I've recently become unemployed and I don't know, I think I'll maybe try and coach some people. Like, oh yeah, that's fantastic. Well done. So, you know, I think it's more your own perception of it than anybody else's perception of it. I don't think externally many people have that same view of you, and as difficult as it might be, maybe trying to, you know, look at it objectively, which is impossible to start, but looking at it objectively, or at least having people around you that can look at it objectively and try and encourage you to think that your behaviour is, you know, normal, and that you are, you know, you're not your job, you are you, you're bigger than your job. I think that is probably a place to start. I suffered with, as I said, more the point, the perception of what my reputation was, and I think more so not only for people that I worked with, but it makes you question your own reputation in your mind. Was it really that, or am I kidding myself? You know, so that doubting process that goes on with that, you know, this mental health situation where you've got the alarming troubles associated with PTSD is fine, and probably, you know, do you have daydreams that, you know, prompt bad memories? Yes. Do you have nightmares about things? Yes. Are you slightly paranoid? Yes. Do you, you know, have bad thoughts, other things that you see that trigger these memories? Yes. You know, all these things that you can clinically put into a tick a box and fit into a category are well and good, but none of that is ever sort of the big picture of your mental health. So all the other things that are associated with ticking those boxes and the subsequent loss of that employment is a much bigger part of the equation. It's like you had all this stuff when you were in the cops, but you had it under control and you had a lid on it, and it may have only been fleeting things here and there that, and then once you've opened the can and the whole thing's come falling apart, the subsequent dealing with that side of it is bigger than the original problem. In my experience anyway. That whole side of it is bigger than the original problem. And to give you an idea of how the process works, I've kind of got sidetracked there. I apologise.
No, it's fine.
But so when you're off, and when I was after a few months of being medicated, kind of weaning slowly off that, trying to basically requesting at the end, can we cut this stuff down dramatically because I cannot do anything.
Were you self-medicating as well with other things like alcohol?
A little, not a lot.
Yeah.
I just didn't have, I wasn't chasing highs, I wasn't chasing lows, I was existing.
Yeah.
Just lock me in a hole, leave me alone. That was it. And then once I started to actually get some traction into the timber work and moving forward in that aspect, that occupied all my thoughts and time, and I actually managed to pull myself off quite a bit of the medication. I don't remember whether I did it according to the doctor or I just kind of went, you know what, I'm just weaning myself down on this. And I was acting I was behaving, fairly stable moods, wasn't too irrational. Things were settling. I was finding a bit of a groove, and I think mostly because I was focused, really focused.
Yeah.
And, pretty productive. And I think
when people see the photos of the timber work you're talking about, they'll understand how much focus that required and the art to it, and how special that work was.
I didn't want this to, I didn't want this little chat to turn into a woe me story. I didn't want this little chat to turn into a, oh, how good is he story. It wasn't that. It's just telling a story.
Yeah.
And I'm not, my goal here was, in taking you up to my house to see the timber work, it was just to give you an understanding of the level of concentration and immersion that I had to put myself in order to feel like I was getting, occupying my time and thoughts.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you did, because I got an appreciation of how much focus you needed to get through what you did by what you did. Like, it gave me, when you said, timber work, and then I saw it, I understood how deep your pain was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess that probably is a pretty apt kind of description of it, So
yeah.
It was, you kind of needed, in my thoughts anyway, it was a bit like the training idea that you train as hard as you possibly can because it drowns out everything else. You can't possibly think of anything else because you're so intent on it. So like when you see the pictures of the timber work, what you'll see is that if you make a mistake on a piece of timber there, that could be a day of cutting. You throw it out and you do another piece. And if you don't have that, there's that consequence to doing it incorrectly. So the focus needs to be there. You're not going to waste day after day messing up bits like that when it takes so long to do it, And then, and so I wanted to just paint that picture so that you would understand that it's not just whittling a piece of timber and it's done. It requires that overwhelming, contribution.
Yeah, which may help then other people realise, okay, I need to find something that I am passionate about and is going to resonate with me, something that is grand or something that is going to take up time and take my mind to a different place. Whatever that may be for you, this may be what it requires.
So that's exactly right. I think that if I was to give one piece of advice about how I dealt with it, and maybe maybe don't listen to my advice. I'm still crying 10 years down the track, but how I moved through that part of my life was find something that means as much to you as the job that you left. Find something that has that you think in your mind will equal that up, and just dig hard to find it. You know, if I could think that of something else that would have done that, I would have done that. You know, it didn't need to be that particular thing. It was just that I could see that in front of me, and I could kind of go, okay, well, you know, if I really, really try, what can I do with this? And then to do that, you know, soaks up a lot of focus and a lot of concentration, and really tries to reinstill some self-confidence in your ability to function as a person and achieve and do things that, you know, I guess, just thinking about it right now, things that other people couldn't do. And, you know, maybe working in places like, you know, the tactical operations unit, things like that. Not everybody can do that.
Yes.
Not everybody can do those things. So, you know, having that level of achievement drives you to that. That helps, I think, restore some balance in what you've lost. You know, so maybe that's, if I was to give a tip to somebody, maybe that would be a good
awesome advice.
Starting point.
Yes, find something that equals the value you held the job at.
There.
That I really like that.
I think maybe that's a starting point. But with the process, in my case, what happened was we would go through those first few months. I started to re-establish some degree of functionality, normal behaviour, could rationalise things that previously I wasn't in a position to rationalise. So not only, you know, things like medication, but it got to the point where the psychiatrist basically would receive a letter many months down the track from the police medical officer or whoever was in charge of discharges or whatever, and they would basically say, look, you know, we're at this point, we want to see how your recovery is going. And I think they organised a couple of interviews with some people from the insurance company or from WorkCover or whoever it was to see how I was progressing at that point. And it was then that I had a conversation with the psychiatrist that I probably expected a different answer. I said to him, he said, look, you need to sort of make a decision about whether you think you're going to go back in some capacity or whether you're going to exit.
Had you thought about that?
Oh, yeah, I had. I thought, all right, I'm starting to feel pretty, you know, a bit lucid, like a bit more me. You know, I'd started to I think at that point I just started to do a little bit of training here and there. So I was by no means fit, but I was, you know, at least sparked some degree of normality in my life.
Yep.
And so we had this conversation, and he said that to me, you know, do you think you're going to go back or are you going to exit? And I said, you're the psychiatrist, what's your opinion on it? And he said, if you're going to go back, he said, there's a few things you should know. He said, firstly, I think that in a very short space of time you'll be back in my office. He said that I think that you're damaged and that you'll continue to damage yourself if you re-enter the police. Secondly, I won't be recommending that you return to an active role in the police. So no firearm, you certainly won't be going back to the TOU. He said, I think that's something that would trigger you very quickly, so that, you know, we would potentially try and find a role from you somewhere away from there in a non-operational position, and you wouldn't be given a firearm. And look, and this is coming from my psychiatrist. This isn't from the insurer's psychiatrist. And you know, I was pretty annoyed by that initially, and I understand why. Look, we're not fools. You can't send someone who was in my condition straight back to a role that I was doing before. You can't send them straight back with a firearm. You couldn't do that. You know, the organisation everyone involved would be highly liable if there was a problem. You know, it would be it would be riddled with danger.
You couldn't do that, yeah.
Right. So we're not fools. We understand that. But I was like, okay, so what's the time frame? You know, do we get a review? What's the time frame on this? Like, when do I come back and see you and we potentially make another decision about that? He said, oh, well, that would depend on how you were going. So, okay. So do we have a plan, like a timeline? Can you give me a timeline? Oh, look, it would be nowhere in the inevitable future. And I'm like, excuse me? Oh, well, I wouldn't recommend that you go back to active duty. You know, I couldn't give you a timeline, but I would be expecting it would be, you know, perhaps several years. I'm like, okay. So what you're telling me is that I could go back and I could reintegrate, but you, as my psychiatrist, are essentially advising me not to come back, and that if I do come back, that I'll be going back to a non-operational role without a firearm in some desk position. Potentially at that age I would have been in my mid-30s. Potentially for another 25 years. Hang on, come on. You know, whether that would have happened or not, I don't know, and probably not. You know, I guess knowing what I know now, it would have been, all right, well, you know, it might have been a few years or it might have been whatever period of time, or you could have reintegrated in and done all that. But there was no guarantees, there was no warranties, there was no even remote suggestion that that would be supported by him. So I'm like, oh, man, you kind of paint me into a corner here.
Yes.
Even if I wanted to go back, I'd be like, am I going back under those conditions? No friggin' way.
Yeah, considering what you're doing in the job.
And a lot of people, a lot of coppers don't know that. Now, I don't know what happened with other people in their, you know, experiences. I expect that a lot of them are probably very similar, because the psychiatrist is in a position where they've got to look after your health.
Yes.
You know, they're bound by that, and that's their job, is to look after your health. And looking back on it now, was it the right decision? Yeah, it was the right decision, of course. But me being me at that point in time, and being so attached to the job and where I was, and the, you know, the status and all the other shit, that was it. And when they put it to you like that, you just kind of go, well, I don't really have a choice, do I? You know, I have a choice. I don't really have a choice. And for those that went back, you know, and managed to come out the other side, you know, I'd take my hat off to you, because it wouldn't have been very easy to do.
Yeah.
But that was the situation with me. So that's what they said to me. So when I heard that, I just went, there is no choice to be made there. That's, you know.
And what was the process for you from then?
Okay, so from then we had, there was a couple of meetings backwards and forth, a bit of paperwork went back and forth between, I guess it was whoever was in charge of police medical, I suppose, the insurer at the time, probably a bit of a round table thing there. And then there was an independent interview organised in town, and so that was, I think, somewhere in the Rocks. I just went down, I had the interview. It wasn't a very long process, I don't think. From memory, maybe 20 minutes.
That was a psychiatrist?
Psychiatrist.
Yep.
Down at the Rocks. He was pleasant enough. Essentially, he said, I'm just reading your psychiatrist report. He said, you know, how you going? He was actually he wasn't unpleasant. He wasn't aggressive. The first lady that I had on accepting the claim, initially accepting a claim like liability, she was very aggressive, blunt, completely, looking back at it now, completely inappropriately, trying to think of the word. It's like her manner, her demeanour was inappropriate for the situation.
Was that your first case manager?
No, she wasn't case manager. She was the assessor.
Oh, okay.
A psychologist who was an insurance assessor for liability.
Yep.
So she was abrupt and blunt, and she was conducting the interview very much. Now, after leaving the police, I did a little bit of insurance investigation, and we can talk about that. But that wasn't that was not a good choice for me. It was did some PT and insurance investigation on the side anyway.
I do have a question about that. So
okay, we'll chat about that in one sec. And she was asking questions much the same as I would for someone who was lodging a claim for a stolen motor vehicle, or not a psychological trauma. Someone having of a human being. We would ask similar questions in the same vein for someone having a car stolen or something of that nature. So, as far as I'm concerned, if I was asking questions that related to a personal injury claim or something of that nature, you approach it significantly differently. And you've got to remember, by the time it gets to an investigator in those circumstances, as far as theft of, say, a car or equipment or whatever, it's already raised a lot of red flags to get to the investigator, for more often than not.
Yeah.
So it's not like just made a claim, it's gone through. You've got this background information which suggests that perhaps this claim isn't legitimate. So, you've framed that in your questions. Whereas this is just a straight up, here, there's been an injury at work, you're coming to get the details, essentially. But her manner and demeanour at the time were pretty aggressive and pretty blunt, and I mean, that may have been amplified by my state of mind. I don't know. I could be being fair. I might have been emotionally pretty highly strung at that point, and perhaps overreacting to some questions, or being more sensitive to them than I would be now. For instance,
it's very fair of you to say. Actually,
well, it might be. It's really hard to judge because, to be quite frank, you're not thinking very lucidly on that opening period of time, and I think that's actually a pretty decent problem that they probably need to address in respect to mental illness. It's if you're mentally in a position that you can't lucidly answer questions, then maybe a support person or someone from the association should be present for those interviews to make sure that they're conducted in a fair manner with their well-being, the copper's well-being being looked after. Now, I don't know whether that's changed. So it might be a good time. You said something before about you wanted to talk to me about the insurance investigation.
How was your experience with the different case managers, and what was your experience of going through that insurance process?
Okay, so I think my first case manager was okay. I don't remember there being any problems with that. It was a bit of a new process for me. There was, you had to supply a bunch of documents, and you have to provide work cover certificates and things of this nature to them on a regular basis. They were what would happen is until you found work, they would provide you with a period of time where you would get like a small payment, like a partial payment or something, like a top up kind of thing. And initially, when you don't have work, you kind of get most of the top up. And the idea of the top up is that it's supposed to bring up any money that you might have. So, like, let's say you left the cops at $100,000 a year, just to pick a number, and then you were earning $60,000 a year. They would provide you with it. It was never really $40,000. I don't think it was maybe like 20 or something. But they would provide you with a bit of money to try and make up some of that difference. Yeah, yes. So that's what that was about. Yep. So until you got up to a job that was paying decent money, then you would get rid of the payment kind of thing.
Yes.
So what they would do is they would require paperwork for that to be ongoing. And some of the case managers I had were good, no problems. And then there's others that would try and make life unnecessarily difficult for you. And I don't mean just requiring additional paperwork or things of that nature. I mean, like, literally come in overnight and go, because you're no longer receiving psychiatric care, we deem that your claim is no longer current. Full stop, your payments will cease as of next week. Bang. No phone calls, just this letter. So you ring up. Oh, g'day, I'm just ringing up about, we tried calling you before, apparently. Okay, get that call. And now we're ceasing this because you're no longer... I said, you did read the legislation. I can send it to you if you like. You did read your psychiatrist's diagnosis of PTSD, and you have paid a partial and permanent disability claim, yeah? Yeah, we're aware of all that. Okay, so a lot of mucking around, get some legal advice, which you shouldn't have to do, obviously, and you start to panic a little bit about, how are we going to pay the bills here, X, Y, Z, and draft an email, send it back to them, and then, a week later you get like this apology letter. Oh, I apologise for that. Oversight, something of that nature. It's signed off at the bottom. This is the cracker. We're here to help, or something of that nature. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
So, you get good claim managers, you get bad ones. And then, the one that I have had in recent times has been fantastic.
Yeah.
Rings up genuinely after your best interests. Fantastic. She actually looked after a friend of mine, and they arranged for his university. She organised to pay his university retraining for him. So, some will go out of their way to really do the best by people, and then you get others that are terrible. I think it's a little bit of luck of the draw in that respect, how your claim goes. You can get some people that are, in it for the right reasons. And I guess that's like any organisation. You're going to get people that are good at their job and others that are not. And that I think when you look at, I think maybe that the age has a good bit to do with it. So the older claim managers that I had were much better than the younger ones. So, I think perhaps that's got something to do with it.
You're at the mercy of what kind of experience and background and age they are, what kind of mood they come to work in.
Yes.
Do you think insurance companies should have a dedicated unit that deals with emergency services, workers' compensation claims for mental health?
Yeah, look, I think that would probably be a good place to start. We might talk a bit more on that. I'm just going to pause this if we can. I think I've got to open the gym actually,
Sure.
Gibbo, so one moment.
So just going over that mental health team within an insurance company that has some more training and understanding of PTSD and the emergency services of what they go through on a day-to-day basis. So you think that's a good idea, and do you feel that would have helped you having more consistency in case managers and how they dealt with you?
Yeah, I don't know what the process is or how they select case managers or what training they are exposed to, but in my mind, you can't treat people with a mental illness the same way that you would deal with someone with a physical illness or physical injury, I should say. So you would think that they would have a few people that are well versed in dealing with people with things like PTSD and emergency services, and probably allocate them to a limited number of managers or caseworkers, and then not give them other cases perhaps. So maybe steer the volume of that work just to that smaller group who become more specialised in that. That would make sense to me. I don't know whether they do that, but it certainly doesn't appear so by the inconsistency that you get from the different managers within the organisation. So, I think that would certainly be beneficial.
Yeah.
I'll go one thing further to say that I think, and I know it perhaps is a difficult ask, but having psychologists, if there are any, that were serving members that have been exposed to these things and can see it from the other side, rather than just relating to ticks on a sheet. Because looking at those other problems that we were talking about, you know, these other associated psychological problems that you get outside of the immediate symptoms of the PTSD, it appears that they almost go, to some extent, undiscussed.
Mm.
You know, they're focused particularly just on what the PTSD entails, and how, you know, we might be able to work our way through that. But on exiting, or on the, you know, the at the time when you're potentially exiting and going through that process, that's, I don't think, well covered by anybody. There's like a gap.
Mm.
You know, that process isn't well administered. It's no longer sort of, the police no longer responsible for it at that point. The insurer isn't really responsible for it at that point. And then there's just like this vacancy that nobody's taking ownership over that. Yeah, but it's funny because you even hear about sporting organisations that have a handle on how to integrate players back into normal life again after finishing playing, you know, football or things like this. So it's strange that an organisation that takes so much, you know, from you mentally doesn't have like a process like that.
Yeah. During that process of from the breakdown to discharge and that going through that 12-month process, did you have any support from the association?
Look, I think I did. I'm not sure how much of it. I don't think it was overwhelming by any stretch, but I think there was something. To be honest, I couldn't remember any details.
Yeah.
Without going back and maybe, you know, trying to review some notes or something. But yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest.
Yeah. Are you aware of, or can you share what you feel the police could do better, or, you know, are there changes now in the TOU that they do now that they didn't do previously?
Yeah, I did raise that before. One of the things that my friend mentioned was that rather than having just a random sergeant or somebody else ticking a box to say that they've contacted the officer that's off sick, they actually try and find a point of contact that they know to be close to the officer. So that's a good thing, so that you've essentially got one of your mates giving you a call, someone that you can have a conversation with, someone that knows you well and that you trust, etc. So that I think that side of things is better than what it was. I think maybe getting some sort of training to management about not so much just PTSD, but how stress, PTSD, and all these things can be intertwined, and how sometimes when you see someone going off with something like PTSD or stress-related symptoms, quite often people will go, oh, this person didn't get what they want, so they're going off. You would have heard that before, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Everybody has. You know, this person didn't get a transfer, or this person was forced to work a different shift, or this person was forced to whatever. What I think needs to be illustrated, in some circumstances, yeah, there's going to be people that spit the dummy and do that, okay? But in a lot of circumstances, you've got to remember that these people are going through other things. So that them going through other things, plus family stress, life stress, now work stress because of XYZ situation, fills up the bucket.
Yes.
So you can't, I think we mentioned this before in the last podcast, you can't pull each individual piece out and treat it like it doesn't affect it. It's like saying, if you treat it like a overtraining, let's look at it from a physical thing, something I can relate to. If I'm overtrained, what does overtraining mean? Well, overtraining is just not overtraining. Overtraining is that you're not eating enough in order to meet the training demands. You're not sleeping enough to recover from the training demands. You're either technique isn't conducted well enough to, meet the demands that you're putting on your body, you're lifting too much weight, having inadequate rest, you're not hydrated enough. There's all these moving parts that contribute to overtraining. Stress, same thing. Lots and lots of little offshoots contributing to stress, which then leads to you, falling over because your mind is overtrained, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
And so to look at someone who got passed over for a promotion or didn't get a spot somewhere or whatever, and immediately associate them going off with that, sometimes might be a fair call, but I think, you need to give people the benefit of the doubt and look at the entire situation before you judge them on that. And it does concern me that some people will wipe their hands of people on seeing one part of behaviour, but have known them for years and years and got a track record of their behaviour, and then they see one thing and associate that what appears to be an obvious link. But if they were to look at that person and go, well, hang on a minute, their pattern of behaviour for the last 10 years doesn't indicate that they're this type of person. Perhaps there's something more going on here.
Yes.
And I think that particularly management who don't necessarily get that same exposure to these people, they can make that conclusion quite, readily, whereas their workmates would have a different situation. Oh, no, don't you know that they're going through a divorce at home, or they're having trouble, one of their kids has got this problem or whatever, and there's all these underlying issues that are all contributing to this, but they don't necessarily see all that. And I think that as a whole, I'm just going to turn that phone off.
Sure, go for it, mate.
Sorry, mate, I thought that was...
Running a busy gym, mate, that'll be going off
all
afternoon. I
thought that was on silent, yeah. So I think as a whole, there's been a big difference in the organisation's general approach, and it's... I'm not going to squarely criticise the organisation. I think it is way too layered to put the blame on an individual or to put the blame on hierarchy as a broad term. Ever since when we joined the job, there was an idea that your mates came first. The job was to look at the job looked after you. Okay. Now, whether I was just young and naive and didn't know any better, and that was my expectation, and I thought that, we're brothers in blue and all this sort of thing, the job would look after you. And then after that, the public. So we could look at, there's plenty of examples of very, very successful companies that employ that adage. There's some famous, CEOs that took over failing airlines back in the 80s that employed that very same tactic. They said, no, the customers come second. Your employees come first. You keep your employees in good health, happy, working well, then the customers will come first as a byproduct of the employees coming first.
Yeah.
Now, that has, over time, been eroded away and, in my opinion, reversed. So what's happened is, whether it's through, bureaucracy, changes of legislation, increased oversight,
politics,
any number of things that lead to this increased number of layers in an organisation that probably could be stripped away to very few layers and be much more efficient. But in that, what's happened is we've had the situation where it's very much organisationally, hierarchy has always been there, but it was, in my opinion, much flatter. It may not have appeared much flatter on a piece of paper, but internally, working in the organisation, it was much flatter. Everyone was on the same team. Now, looking back at it, it's very much, people compete for jobs against each other. Yeah. People are, there's the old promotion system, which wasn't, put it this way, it wasn't fantastic, but at least seniority and time accounted for something. The old book, when your number comes up, you're next on the list, away you go. So young people couldn't just overtake people that had been in there for a long time. That's not ideal either. Let's face it, there's going to be people that slide through the cracks. But the general premise that, people were respected, but the people that were respected were there to support. And it was that was kind of, it always seemed to be that if you had a problem, you'd go to the sergeant. You wouldn't be fearful of going to the sergeant that he was going to, he might give you a clip around the ear because you've done something stupid, but he's going to back you up.
He's got your back.
He's got your back. And if you went out to a job and things got untidy, then you know that the people there were going to help you out. People there were going to make sure that you were looked after. You might have self-medicated the wrong way, drinks after night shift, drinks over, so the whole concept of the camaraderie that occurred within the job, I'm sure it's there in small pockets, but it used to be quite widespread. So when you would go on, remember the old 8-hour shifts, you would do a morning shift or an afternoon shift, say for instance, and it was customary that you would go out for a beer afterwards. Now, that got, as you went to 12-hour shifts at different units, that got harder and harder to maintain.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is that venting, debriefing process, whether it right, wrong, or indifferent, there was an outlet for it. And I think that's dissolved in a lot of ways. And without that outlet and without that interaction, that trusted interaction between the group and between people of what should be different rank structures, but it didn't matter. If you went out for a beer and the sergeants were there, they weren't in a group of sergeants and a group of, everyone was in the same place.
You're all on the same team.
I clearly remember that. And I would be surprised nowadays if you had, very many inspectors having a beer with the troops. There will be some, but I would say as a whole, there's a degree of separation there, and people are going to call it professionalism and all the rest of it. Like, please, more often than not, and I heard Mark's podcast there a little while ago talking about that degree of separation of middle management and how some of the inspectors spend more time doing job applications than they do actually looking after their troops. And I think to some extent, the experiences that I've seen, that's definitely something that rings true. That once they get to that position, their career aspirations, if they desire to go up, it's important that they have that degree of separation according to the powers that be in order to make it any further.
Yeah, to show that they can be impartial and can separate from corruption, and they can put themselves above.
Yeah, and look, to be quite honest, I don't have an issue with, I understand the organisation is in a difficult position with oversight and with people that, post-Royal Commission, obviously there was things that were done that weren't deemed to be right, and there's always going to be that issue that you are going to be tackling, potential corruption. Anytime you allow someone some discretion to make a decision, there's a chance they're going to get it wrong, or there's a chance that some bad eggs are going to make poor decisions and take advantage of a situation. But we could go on all day about whether they should change that, or where you go about, do you start at a better place? Yeah. You start with better selected people to start off with, and then you get less of the problems on the other end. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think that the nature of it is that the organisation as a whole has, created some degree of separation in there, rather than that we're all on the same team. No. You work for us. We're not part of the same team. You work for us. Okay? And there's that difference.
You're 100% right, and I back that up totally. And if we had have been doing this podcast in 1998, it would have been the war on the streets. Now it's the war inside and out, because there is a separation and there is infighting and there is a cultural issue between officers and management and DOs and constables and etc.
Yeah, I think it's probably hard to quantify in a direct category. Yeah. But I would just say that the feel of it overall, and people are going to go, well, how can you say the feel of it? Well, when you've worked at a few police stations for a lot of years, you'll know what I mean. And it's
Yeah.
not really it's my interpretation of it, that when I was in the job, and not like, look at the fact this way, it wouldn't have helped. It's not necessarily going to have helped me, because until you can recognise it, or until you can acknowledge yourself that potentially there's something wrong, then you could have a dozen people pointed out to you, and you may still not accept it.
Yes.
So that, I don't know whether it may help other people. It just may not have helped me under my circumstances, because I certainly wouldn't have acknowledged any of it until post. Until I fell over, I would have just gone, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
do you remember the day you were discharged?
No.
And, okay, life after the police?
I don't know, that sounds kind of crazy to think you were discharged there. Like, I think I got sent something maybe in the post. I don't know. I don't remember a day.
Any conversation from the organisation around that? It was just you received something to say?
Yeah, I think I received something. I think that was about the extent of it. I spoke to maybe some guys from work, some friends.
Do you remember how you felt about that?
That was it. Maybe vacant.
Yeah.
Just vacant, kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
I don't know else how to describe it. Empty, a little bit.
Yeah. So what happened in life after that in terms of employment? Okay. And for those that have recently are no longer police, is there any advice for them?
Okay, so life after the police, this is one thing this is where I think the insurers really kind of get it wrong. We touched on this before about, quality of case managers and things. And one of the things that I think they get wrong is that you've gone off with a psychological injury. So part and parcel of that is that you may be capable of many, many physical jobs, right? But when you go off with a psychological injury, there's no consideration of the psychological impact of the job other than will it trigger your PTSD. So all the other peripheral stuff that we talked about psychologically, about, the status that you had in your last employment, the responsibility that you might have had, the gravity of the decisions that you were making, how important that job was to you as an individual, none of those areas are, is it mentally stimulating, is it challenging, any of these things, which are, let's face it, the mind controls the body, right? So none of these things are taken into consideration when you go and, say, for instance, they say, well, you could get a job at Bunnings. Yeah, okay. And no offence to the people that are working at Bunnings. I'm sure some people really enjoy the work and it's probably a great job. It's not something that would personally, that I would enjoy. And coming from where I was working, I would see that as something that wouldn't really challenge me mentally or stimulate me mentally.
Yes.
So if I was to, and it could be any job, it's not necessarily just Bunnings, but it could be a job working anywhere, right? If they think that going from doing what I was doing to going to do a job of, menial in nature like that with no responsibility and none of these other things attached to it is going to mentally keep me stimulated to the point where my mental health stays well, they completely misunderstand the situation and haven't considered it. So it's been completely all considered.
Yeah.
And yet they don't really have any input to that. They're quite happy for you to go and get any job that you can, and they'll, supposedly look at your qualifications and RPL you and do all these types of things if necessary. But the bottom line is that most people that have been in the police are trained to be policemen. They're trained in like fields, so they're either investigation or, going and working for private organisations doing similar sort of work, or working for, corrective services, or working for things like that, a lot of which are, again, damaging to your mental health, so they can't go and do those things. So once you take that pool of jobs out, then you're left with stuff that's not police-like, which is fine from a mental health perspective. As far as your PTSD is concerned, there's no, less chance of triggering it and this sort of things. But more often than not, you're starting at the bottom of the pile because you don't have qualifications for any of these jobs. So now you're back to the bottom again. So then we're back to menial tasks, no responsibility, no. So we're really not helping people find work that is mentally suitable for them, again, to try and marry up the loss. And it's a mental injury. So that's like me saying, I'm going to go and do a physical job. I've hurt my back. Okay, well, we're going to put you in a job where you can sit down all day instead of picking things up. Yeah. Oh, great. So now I'm going to hurt my back less, but because I'm sitting down all day, my back's still going to get sore over a long period of time. Is that any better? So instead of me not being able to work immediately, I can work immediately, but in 18 months I'm going to be back off again with a sore back.
Yeah.
Same thing. I go into this job where I'm mentally not challenged, not requiring, no status, no challenge, no any of these things that have kept me afloat in the other job that I was in, and all of a sudden I'm 18 months down the track. Where am I?
Yeah.
I'm back to sliding down this hill, mental. So I think that there needs to be some process in place to account for that.
Yes.
And to deal with that aspect of it. So that would maybe fall into that transition phase that we were talking about. So if I was going to say to people who are getting out, the one thing I would push really hard for if I was getting out again is to envisage a career or a job that will mentally stimulate you and fill that hole a little bit. Because if you don't, I think you'll settle and you'll fall back off again, and then you'll settle and you'll fall back off again. It'll be a revolving door. So
it's exactly what happened to me.
There you go.
The other flow on from that is I started to be attracted, and there are a lot of ex-police who are now in investigation roles or enforcement roles or in some kind of enforcing restrictions. And
police who aren't police.
Yes, yes. And so it wasn't until I realised one day that I was in a job where I was in enforcement role, and I wanted to get into fights because I hated myself, and I thought I've got to get out of any job relating to conflict because this was just tearing my soul apart. And I was going from one conflict job to another because that's what I knew as a cop. I was trained to be a cop, and trained to enforce and train in legislation. So you gravitate to those roles. It wasn't until I got out of conflict roles and got into the gyms and more positive environment that things started to calm in relation to my triggers.
Yes.
You went into investigations afterwards, and those people that are currently in those roles now that are ex-police, would you recommend, as you just said, looking for something that is more mentally stimulating, that's not in investigation or conflict?
Yes. So I think, I went into training obviously I spent a lot of time training in the police, and I went into doing PT and running a boot camp kind of thing, which is how this place grew as a result of that. So I went into that initially, but it's very hard to make a living doing that. So essentially what you do is you take up a role. I could get investigation work like that because of background. It was easy to get into. I had contacts there. I just basically started investigating some stuff, doing insurance investigation. And look, initially I found it interesting because it was new.
Yes.
Pretty challenging. I spent, way more hours on things than I billed for. But it was quite rewarding initially. And then got into a few situations very much the same, ended up in some conflicts with people, at jobs to be interviewing people for vehicle fraud, staged accidents and things of this nature. And a lot of jobs take you into places that you would have worked in when you were in the cops, certain, clientele that you would have interacted with while you were in the cops. And so it wasn't so much from a triggering perspective, it was that almost exactly like you said, I don't know that I'm good at conflict anymore. I'm not good at it. I don't want it.
I don't want it.
Don't
exactly.
want it. I don't need it. And so, a few jobs like that where it's just like hostile, and I'm like, you know what? I spent enough time doing this. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. So I stopped that work. And my psych at the time, who I was still seeing, this is 3 years after I left or something, said, look, that's probably a really good move.
Yeah.
He said, I've been waiting for a while. He said, I left it with you, but I've been waiting until you said you'd had enough of it.
Yeah. I saw a good quote that said, and it just resonated with me, and it was, you can't heal in the place that destroyed you or hurt you. And I found that resonated with me, that made sense, that I was going from the police into investigation roles and enforcement roles, and I was trying to understand what I was feeling and thinking, but also kept triggering.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I was out of that completely that I really now look back on, that's when I started to heal, because I was out of conflict.
Yes.
So yeah, that's...
Yeah, no, I think that's probably probably on the money there. I think that whilst you're in the thick of it, it's very hard to think objectively about anything. Your emotions start to build up and it starts to get the better of you again. So it's not until you kind of step away at it, and quite often a long time after that you're able to look back at it and go, well, that's sort of makes sense now. So I think you're probably right. It would be and it's one of the reasons that I am not 100% sure that opening the can of worms is a good idea for people that are in the field. I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what the psychological boffins have to say about that. But I would ask them to bear in mind that unless you've really served and unless you've actually spent some time doing that you get an understanding of what's required and how it actually affects you. So I unfortunately don't have any real answers that would be directly like applicable to the organisations involved, because as we've discussed, there's a lot of complex things that go on here. There's liability is a huge thing for these big organisations. If they make decisions that affect something that they do, and somebody ends up, making a poor decision on the street and costing somebody else their life, or there's, the number of police themselves that, access firearms and commit suicide or do other things of that nature. There's a certain degree of, responsibility, duty of care and liability that all overlaps with each other, and it makes me. It's always been a curious thought that I've had as to things like well checks and things like these ongoing checks with psychologists. Once there's an obligation or any sort of incumbent for the psychologist to report behaviour back to the command, it becomes a very difficult thing to manage. So you, as the person who's going to seek help within the organisation, goes to a well check, you say certain things because you're feeling a certain way, the psychologist goes, I don't know, is that, at what point do they draw the line? I don't know whether they have guidelines to say, hey, look, if you hear this, you've got to step up and say something about this. I don't know how those lines are drawn. What degree of medication can people be on and still be active with firearms within the police? There's all sorts of really complex areas that start to, inhibit the way that any clear lines would operate. So if you drew up a procedure or a policy with a bunch of tick and flick boxes to try and systematise it, which is, we all know the cops like to make everything like McDonald's. They try and keep it as straightforward. It never works, but it's the concept is, let's make this as foolproof as possible. So if they tried that with things like mental health, it's a really difficult thing. If you get people that are feeling a particular way and they, say certain things, and people can manufacture what they say in order to get a certain response too. So there's no it's not like I see a broken bone and I can treat that because I know an X-ray shows me that this is a broken bone. There's no X-ray inside your head.
Yeah, that's right.
So
it's so complex.
It's very complex because if you said, okay, well, these are the parameters that we're going to make a decision on to say you come to a well check with a problem, the psychologist hears certain things and says, okay, I've got to tell your boss about this. The boss then says, hey, look, what's going on? You say, no, there was nothing wrong, etc. Creates more conflict and more stress, and we go round and round in circles. So I don't know what the answer is. I think there's probably far smarter people than me in the field that would be able to, come up with some procedures or policies that are better than the current ones.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But yeah, it's a difficult thing to manage.
I've got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah, hit me up.
First one is, for those that know a police officer, they're a family member or a friend, and they're going through a process at the moment where they're off work. Do you have any advice that worked or was helpful for you when you were off, that family and friends did for you, that helped you in your situation? Or is it something that they have to go through alone?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, if it was me and I was back in that situation as best as I could think, a text message, I think, from a friend, given a text message, you can reply, you can not reply. You're not obliged to feel like I'm answering the phone or ducking a phone call or anything. Text message, they can read it and respond to it when they feel ready to.
I like that, yes.
I think that's a good, moderate approach. And just something like, hey, mate, thinking about you, I hope you're okay. If you want to chat, let me know.
Yep.
Something like that. Just It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It's just knowing that, hey, I haven't been abandoned here. People are still thinking about me.
I'm not alone.
Not alone. Then if they choose to take that up, or, hey, bud, how you travelling? Thinking about you. Hope you're well.
Yep.
Something like that leaves the door open for them. Lets them know that you're there, but you're not imposing on them. You're not putting them into a position where they're going to feel like they have to avoid your phone calls or anything like that.
Yeah, I like that.
That would be the thing that I would say. Anything more than that, I don't know. It'd be so individualised, because I know certainly when I was going through it, I felt like a hermit.
Yeah.
Didn't want to be around other people. Didn't want social occasions. I didn't want that. That's probably the hardest part, is that when you separate from the job at that time and you're going through that process, you're separating from a huge amount of your friends at the same time.
Yes.
So for a lot of jobs, people maybe got friends in the office or whatever, but a lot of people have a big group of external friends. In the police, you'll find that proportionately, a lot of people have most of their friends in the same organisation.
Yeah.
Shifts and things just make that the natural flow of things. You're working funny hours, you're associating with the same people. If you're in a specialist unit, you spend all your time with those people and you see less of everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's your friend base. You take your friend base away and take your job away at the same time, you're not left with a lot.
Yeah. A huge chunk of you and your life is just torn apart, torn out.
Most definitely.
And it leaves a big hole. And probably a good segue into this question is, or really it's probably, just to get your experience of this, but for those that don't know, you've created Last Round Gym here in North Richmond, and I've watched this community and this gym grow over the last 6 years that I've been aware of, 5 or 6 years that I've been aware of it, and I have had nothing but respect and admiration for what you have built here. You mentioned before that you're trying to keep busy, not to go down that slippery slope again, and you've thrown yourself into the timber work, and now you've thrown yourself into this gym. And I think this is an incredible place that you have built. Can you share for everyone how this come about and what the feelings you have about last round and how helpful that's been to you?
Yeah, so so when I left, started PT, as a result of the PT, thought, let's run a boot camp.
Yep.
Had some friends of friends were looking for someone to do some training for them. Started with 4 people. After doing it at a couple of different houses, people's homes, going around 3 or 4, moved to the park just over the back here, and grew that over the course of a couple of years to about 75 or somewhere thereabouts. So, ran a bunch of different sessions in the park, had 75 people coming over the course of the week, some of them multiple times a week.
Yeah.
And then so we sort of outgrew the park, got sick of trying to pack up in the rain and weather and moving equipment in and out of trailers and things, and it was logistically just limited equipment and resources, and didn't really fully sort of realise what I wanted people to do. So funny enough, one day we just saw a for lease sign on the back fence. And I jokingly said to Lisa, I said, I'm going to look at that big shed there, it's for lease. And for those who can't see this place, we've never been here, it's an old motor vehicle wreckers. And it was a foundry before that, and so we had a nightmare of a process to get it over the line. But the bottom line was it's a massive big shed. It's like 40-odd metres long and 12 metres wide, and it's got like a, quarter-acre backyard out there, and it's big. So we took on this process of this idea of this indoor-outdoor facility. So you could still boot camp, but it was like boot camp with shelter, So we thought, that'd be good. We don't have to pack stuff up anymore. People can run out around a track and come back in, and then shoestring budget, we started to put this thing together. Anyway, we had massive costs for a DA because it used to be a wreckers. It was like, okay, they wanted contamination testing and all this sort of gear. So tens of thousands of dollars worth of testing completed, and drilling holes through concrete slabs looking for oil or asbestos residue and all that. Anyway, it all got over the line eventually. A year after we took the place on, we got it over the line and moved into the place. Mountains and mountains of cleaning and restoration, and trying to find the cheapest surface coverings known to man, because one of the things of the DA was you had to have every floor surface covered, because it used to be one of the remediation strategies. Floor surfaces and walls covered up to a certain height. So that was quite an undertaking. Rear yard all had to be covered. So it's a lot of surface area to find materials for. And,
absolutely.
And flooring is very expensive, like your rubber flooring. So I was scouring Gumtree, I think, at the time, and driving all over the state picking things up. And I even sent my in-laws went up with a big trailer and picked up a tennis court worth of AstroTurf for $500 or something, and drove it back from the mid-north coast, So everyone was contributing to make this happen on a shoestring budget. And we got it up and running in its bare form probably nearly 6 years ago now. Yeah. And then pretty much every year, to my wife's dismay, I have changed the layout and continually grown it. And, I haven't finished the house yet, haven't finished the gym yet. It's continuing to evolve where, we got hit COVID last year pretty hard and shut down for a while, but we've sort of regathered ourselves and gained some more momentum on the back end of that. And, we're probably grown from our, half a dozen in the park to 170-odd people. Over the years, probably had 500 people through a year at any given time. So what that means for me, I suppose, is that I'm very busy coaching. A lot of coached work here. It's a great cultural place. So when people come to a normal gym, I'm not going to spruik all day on your gym here. It's just not a sales pitch.
No, I've watched it from the outside, bro, and I think you're being, you're humble, and it's just not about selling it, but It's about what you can create when you put your mind to it and you put your love and care into it.
Yeah, so I think we've cultivated a really strong culture here, like more so than most places. It's a very inclusive place too. So, you know, I've got 70-year-old people with a bad knee training in the same group as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old athlete, you know, and everything in between, all in the one class. And we manage that through careful exercise selection. We have a very stringent kind of onboarding process, if you like, as far as coaching's concerned. We're very conservative in what we prescribe initially. We consider that the fitness journey is a journey that is long, and that it's not a matter of a 6-week challenge or a 12-week challenge. It's something that we take longevity, because I'm old and broken now, is something that's...
Makes two of us, mate.
Yeah, not alone. Is very important to me, because I think people, you know, come into the idea that I just want to get fit for this, or I just want lose a few kilos for this wedding, or fit into this dress, or whatever it is. And, you know, that might be great intentions, and it might be the one thing that motivates them to get into the gym. But my job from there is to look at them as a whole and say, okay, well, we're here now, and I know you want to get there, but what's beyond that, and how do we do that progressively, safely, and move people in the right direction, you know, through sort of, here's a sales pitch, through, you know, an education process.
Yeah.
So we look at being, our sort of tagline, if you want to call it, is education, application, and innovation. So, you know, we educate people on how to do it, we apply it, we get them to do it, and then if there's things that we need to modify, we come up with, you know, we innovate to make sure that they can continue to do that. If injuries or things come around, or that they've got certain things that they need to work their way around, and, you know, we navigate a course through so they can continue to grow year after year and continue to make progress.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've got people here that in their 40s and 50s that are making more, are stronger and fitter now, and better body composition than they ever were in their 20s.
Yeah.
You know, and we're seeing that time and time again.
Yeah.
So the end goal of the place is just to, I guess, make a gym that I wish I grew up in, I suppose.
Yep.
Probably it.
Perfect. And I say this because there are a lot of people who have reached out recently who are in that process now of, or in that being of, they're a shell.
Yeah.
And they're right at the start of their experience of leaving the police, or, you know, trying to understand their emotions and what they're going through, and their PTSD. I wanted to show them that it's going to take time, and it's going to take some care and love, you know, throughout the process, and support. But this is the end result. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Eventually, hang in there. Just just do what you need to do day by day. You were there. You can get to a place that is better than where you are now.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I think just listening to what you said's prompted something there, that if you look longer term rather than shorter term.
Yes.
So what I mean by that is if you don't have, you're not, let's say for instance, you've got a passion for being a teacher or an architect or an engineer, take the time now to go and do the degree.
Yes.
Go and get the training, pursue it. Because 5, 6, 7 years down the track, you'll go through some menial jobs that don't fulfill you at all. You'll regret that you ever had to leave the police, which is bad enough. And then you'll take a job because it was an opportunity or a timing or whatever. Pursue what you can now and look long term. Look for, 4 years, it's a long time to do a course or a degree or whatever it is. But, if you're only in your 30s or 40s, you've got another 20 or 30 years of work ahead of you.
Yes.
It's like a whole nother career.
Yes.
So maybe use this opportunity as that jumping off point to pursue that other career. Because if you don't find that thing that you're passionate about, I think you'll regret it.
Yes.
And you'll end up 10 years down the track doing a big circle and come back going, gee, I wish I had done that. and then you'll try and catch it up later. And you know, if you want to, you probably still can, but it's going to be much easier while you've got this clean break to just go, you know what? It might be hard now, and it might be really tough to find the motivation to do that, but just start looking. You know, thinking about what do you like, what do you enjoy doing. When you'd rather go to work and do something that you actually enjoy rather than doing something because it's a paycheck. That would be the advice I would give.
Great way to end, I think, mate.
Sounds good, mate. Thank you very much, Gibbo.
Mate, I just really appreciate you as a person. I respect you and have for a long time. I know today was extremely difficult for you, and you know, I just really thank you, and I know the listeners and those watching on YouTube will really appreciate what you've said. And how can people reach out to you if they want to join the gym here?
Oh, come on, man. I wasn't going to do any
Last
plugging.
one.
They can find Last Round on the net. I'm sure if you look up Last Round, you'll find me.
I'll put it up.
There's not too many on there. Anyway.
But thank you, mate. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Cheers.